When somebody gets diagnosed with cancer, quite often they are just so overwhelmed, so freaked out by this diagnosis, and they want to act immediately. This whole process of getting rid of it is taking too long, and they come on the diet, and they come on this thing about fasting, and they think that they can just do this like 12-day fast and the cancer is going to go away. So maybe 12-day fast might help as far as prevention and wiping out cells before they start to actually build up to the point where they are a cancer. But once you have the cancer, you can impact that, like I said, angiogenesis. You can do the housekeeping with fasting. That's going to clear out a lot of dead cells. But there's no reason for me to think that there aren't going to be a few of these little microscopic ones floating around. And so you got to figure out some other strategy for dealing with them long term. And and people go in different directions. They can combine ketogenic diet with conventional care. Sometimes that's real tricky. Or they can combine it with alternative. I guess it just rips my heart up when I see somebody with a really curable cancer, like with a surgery, who could do a fast for, even if it was a week fast or a 5-day fast before they went in for the surgery. Actually, just a few days ago, a paper got accepted, GBM, glioblastoma multiforme, a really aggressive form of brain cancer, case study, clinic in Egypt. And I was working with the authors on this. That guy did a 72-hour fast, and he did 900 calories a day ketogenic prior to his resection, and he had a good resection. And also the tumor that they resected had different histology than the normally resected glioblastoma. When they find it, they go, oh, we got to get this out right away, go right in, take it out. So when you compare something that was removed immediately to something that was removed after only a few weeks of a ketogenic diet, and you look at those and you go, something's going on here.
Miriam, thanks so much for coming on. It's great to be with you.
Wonderful to be here finally.
In person,
you do this in person. It's really a thrill for me.
Totally. Yeah. Thank you. Well, Montana's beautiful. I'm very excited. I want to explore a little bit more this afternoon.
Yeah, we are too.
Cool. Gonna go hiking? Or?
Hiking.
Nice. Yeah. Do you have snowshoes, or are you just going?
No, we're just going to find a trail that just has a few inches of snow and go for it.
Yeah. Awesome. So you've been doing keto pretty exclusively for the past 10 years, right? More.
Yes, actually, my husband has done it much more rigorously than me. But we both do it. We both walk the walk.
Mm-hmm. There must have not been. I mean, I remember when I first heard about it in 2002. In the bodybuilding world, people were doing it, and there wasn't the research that we have, the lay press, all the bloggers, and all that. So it must have been an uphill climb, because you were doing it for yourself, but also for your child at that point, and the medical community kind of poo-pooed the diet at that point, right?
Oh, not just poo-pooed it. They were just totally oppositional, throwing up obstacles. Luckily, we had a local team that was very supportive. But yeah, I mean, I got to say, we would never have gotten there. I would never have learned about the diet. We would never have done this if it wasn't just this accidental discovery online, just as my son was heading for a steep cliff. Mm-hmm. He was just a little guy. He was 7 at the time, and we'd been dealing with this tumor for like 2.5 years, brain tumor. So finding the diet was just amazing. And actually, when we got this amazing MRI 3 months on the diet, I was just blown away. We were all blown away. We were hoping just to kind of slow things down a little bit, give us a little more time with this little guy. But yeah, it was more than that. It was very, very dramatic.
The regression.
Yes, the fact that no chemotherapy had slowed it down, that no surgery had slowed it down, and now he had hydrocephalus on top of it all, and pituitary and hypothalamic issues, and here this just stopped it.
That's amazing. Yeah.
What
can you quantify the progression, or the percent of regression, like between successive MRIs, and if so, like how much are we talking, so people can kind of quantify?
So here was a tumor that was out of control and was growing rapidly. And I can't give you the stats on the rapid growth, but I can tell you that in 3 months of diet and a very weak chemo drug that just kept our oncologist in his profession's good graces. My son had already failed that one. The tumor, by anybody's estimate, 10 to 15%.
Wow.
So it had quieted down metabolically. So it had regressed 10 to 15%. So it was smaller in all dimensions. It was huge. It was the size of an orange when we started out, when we learned about it. And so to have that just stop like that was pretty amazing.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
And now you since have gotten a master's degree in nutrition, you're reading the biochemistry, working with Seyfried and William Curtis and others. From a mechanistic standpoint, a lot of people that tune into our podcast like to know the details. Can you speculate onto maybe how the body, or how the body's immune defenses, or how does it shrink like that when you go keto?
Okay, so let me add another thing here. We were doing it wrong. We were using the model for kids with epilepsy, but also listening to what Tom Seyfried was saying about calorie restriction. So we combined the two. I thought I was doing a 4-to-1 ratio, but when you add the calorie restriction, we were more along the lines of a lower ratio. But the important thing was the calorie restriction. Yeah. And we could do this with my little guy because he suffered from what they call hypothalamic obesity, which was the damage to the hypothalamus from the tumor, and so the hyperinsulinemia that results from that just made him a little eating machine. He was like a hungry little bear all the time. He'd go out and he'd eat windfall pears with hornets in them, and he'd go and eat green tomatoes off the vine. So he was just driven to eat, and the ketogenic diet resolved that as well, because as his insulin was lowered and he wasn't spiking it, that all quieted down despite the ongoing damage to the hypothalamus. That didn't go away. The tumor was still there.
That's amazing.
I know. So why wouldn't somebody want to do this?
Seriously.
Yeah.
So the appetite suppressing effects of the ketones really help to override like a pathological dysfunction in the hypothalamus. So, I mean, for folks that have heard of like leptin resistance and all that, I mean, that's really at that brain center that we're talking about here. So that is really profound.
Yeah, and I wish that we had known then what I understand now, and we would have done some baseline testing and then ongoing, but we didn't. At one point we were looking at insulin and IGF-1, and those things were on the low end, but they weren't super low. But given the damage that he had, having an insulin, fasting insulin, I think it was 6, was pretty good. So as far as the mechanism for it to work, just the fasting mimicking that goes on by just switching to a ketogenic diet. And he was real low carb. We had him at like 10 to 12 grams of carb a day. Protein sufficient for his weight, which was the same model as the kids for epilepsy, but they don't calorie restrict those kids. They don't need to. And to get the most effectiveness out of this diet, we decided to calorie restrict. And that impacts angiogenesis. So mechanistically, what you're doing through those nutrient sensing pathways is saying, oh, there aren't really the right kinds of nutrients for growth here. Let's clean up our act a little bit, and we're going to shut down this aberrant network that we've built to feed the tumor. So that is most likely, from what I hear from from people that have looked at those scans, is that's most likely what was going on in that first 3 months was reducing the metabolic activity.
Mm-hmm. So starving out the aberrant cancer cells.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
So that's a big adaptation, is it not, in cancer, the angiogenesis, and the cancer kind of needs to fuel itself with sugar and everything to propel the growth. So it's like cutting off the hose, to a garden. The plants are going to die essentially.
Yeah. So but people think that we can starve. That's the simple view. That's where they often start. And that's one of the reasons I wrote my book, was like, I really had to get out there that is so much more than starving your tumor of glucose. Mm-hmm. You have glutamine in there for one thing, and you have these metabolic pathways that are dysregulated in cancer. So you have the mTOR pathway, mammalian target of rapamycin. So you have the mTOR pathway, you have the IGF-1 pathway. So for people with cancer, they may have heard that their IGF-1 pathway is upregulated. And that is a hormone, it's a growth hormone, and it's associated with insulin. So it's very similar to insulin, uses some of the same receptors as insulin. So, but what it does is it just is like, let's get this stuff in here and let's signal this cancer cell to grow. We're going to tell it the growth signaling, instead of saying, there's something wrong with me in here and we should really kick this one out. So to have a diet that can impact, they're always looking for ways to impact in the pharmaceutical world, to impact mTOR and impact IGF-1, and the other cancer-promoting pathways, and to upregulate pathways associated with health. But they're looking at it one drug at a time, and they're not looking at it as a total system. We are a system, exquisite system. And in order for this, to be successful, you're got to take a systems approach. And the ketogenic diet is the systems approach.
Yeah. One thing that I've struggled to explain to people, I think it's a brilliant point that goes along with the mTOR and the growth and so forth, is that the ketogenic diet is anti-catabolic. So in a sense, right, like it spares protein and all that, but it's not necessarily growth promoting. Right. Can you help us better understand that? Because I think for some people it's hard to grasp a little bit, and it leads then into protein intake, and you hit on it a little bit, because we're seeing a lot of people that have been keto for a while go into this carnivorous diet and really enhancing their protein intake to an extreme amount, which if that benefits them for depression or whatever condition, great. But maybe all that protein may not be needed due to the inherent effects of the...
Yeah, I really think that limiting the protein is essential in having a successful approach to ketogenic diet for cancer. Without limiting the protein, you're stimulating mTOR throughout the system. So what we want to do with cancer is keep that mTOR synthesis, that mTOR upregulation specific to the muscle tissue. Mm-hmm. So that is, I talk to everybody about the need to do some resistance training, the need to do some cardio. You got to keep the system working optimally, because if you don't, that's where you can run into some trouble. As you're losing weight, you're going to lose fat mass, but you're also going to lose muscle mass. Mm-hmm. So if you keep stimulating through exercise, keep stimulating the muscle, the breakdown, and then it's calling for the right things to rebuild the muscle. That's the workaround in cancer to the low protein thing. And I'm low protein. I'm still building muscle. There's not. I think it's a false idea in people's heads that they can do this for cancer. There's some research. But it wasn't really, I don't know, there's so many things that when I look at that particular research on a meat and fat diet, I say, yes, it's worked for that individual, and it's worked for that individual, and if I sat down and talked to them, I'd probably figure out why it worked for those individuals, or I'd find out that they weren't really just meat and fat. And I have done that with several people, and I have found out that it wasn't just meat and fat. Even athletes don't need as much protein as they think they do. I'm sure you're not at the same, I'm sure, but I would guess that you're not at the same protein intake that you might have been earlier on in your... No,
definitely way less. Yeah, especially since being, in the last 3 years, hardcore keto, I find that I can do more with less.
Yeah.
And I think that's a great approach, just philosophically. Why I like not having to eat as often. It takes time away from productivity, and it's expensive and all that. So that's just my personal approach.
Yeah. And when people call this a high protein, high protein diet and the damage to the environment through eating animals and all that, it's like, just do it responsibly. There's a lot of damage to the environment, even in people who are eating plant-based diets. There's going to be damage to the environment. So just kind of mitigate that. And so if somebody was to look at the amount of protein I have at a meal, they'd go, whoa, that's not even as much as what I'm taking in, for the most part. So, it would be really hard for me to believe that people can be truly ketogenic. Like you said, there may be some specific issues that and especially if somebody has some real issues, digestive issues around the digestion of plants, then they're going to want to go in the other direction. But I see this as a continuum, and I see on one end you've got the vegan community and what they stand for, and they're zealots. And then on the other end you have carnivory, and they are zealots also. And I think, there's so much more of us that are going to fit in that middle spot, and maybe kind of over here at times, maybe back over down here at times, If you're getting the results that you want, isn't that the diet you should be on?
That's
the
a
one
great
that's
point.
getting the desirable results.
Yeah. And then ebb and flow, I mean, it brings up the element of seasonality that kind of gets lost in the narrative. And how do you feel about that? Maybe even if you are keto for a specific condition, maybe in the summer or fall, I mean, this is my own belief because I'm maybe biased because I have a garden and I love fruit and all that. Having more seasonally available fruits, how do you feel about that?
I do. In the summer, I eat more berries. There's no doubt about it because they're available and they're tastier than the winter berries might be. Yeah, there's room for that. Once you've got this diet, and Jeff Volek calls it dialed in, once you've got this diet dialed in, I think even with cancer, there's some leeway in that. And I think there's some real benefit to seasonality. I mean, when we're going into the fall and winter, I want a lot of those, those stewed meat meals. And rutabaga is very keto. You can put a rutabaga in there. And in the summer, I want more salads, but salads don't really appeal to me in the winter. And it makes sense that they don't appeal to me in the winter.
Right.
It's just I had some beets that were left over. 50 grams of beets, by the way, does not budge my glucose.
Wow.
So I had some beets that were left over, finally cooked them up, and it's like, had a serving of them. And it's like, what am I doing there? We're moving into spring now, so bye-bye.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah. Very interesting. Going back to calculating, actually, I guess I want to give a little bit of argument for the carnivore diet and so forth. Some proponents say that eating all these vegetables is as unnatural as eating all the meat because they're cultivated in modern products of agriculture. So what would you say to that in speaking specifically about like the digestibility and some of the anti-nutrients when it comes to eating these vegetables that we know have health properties? How do you feel there, and should we be having as many vegetables as some vegans say we should have, 10 to 12 servings? What are your thoughts?
I have seen the worst outcomes in people who eat those 10 to 12 servings of fruits and vegetables a day in cancer. I'm not going to speak to anything else, but I suspect this is true in a lot of these diseases, especially the diseases we call aging. Like I said, we're in this exquisite system. We're designed to be able to take in a variety of different things. So hormesis, I mean, if you think of hormesis, it's pushing your body to deal with the things that are coming into it. Unless you have a specific, like I have some histamine issues developed over the last 20 years. I know where they came from, but I have to live with it now. And so I'm a little more careful about the amount and the quality of the meat that I take in. But I don't have a problem with the cruciferous vegetables. I can eat those. So I understand the concept, and I understand the science of it, and I understand why the plant-based community thinks we need all these antioxidants and phytochemicals, and I understand why the carnivore community thinks that we don't want them. But you gotta come together at some point and look at our evolutionary biology. That is like the prime source of how we can handle the stuff that comes in. And I think it's actually good to push your system a little bit in that direction, just as you would push your system through a sauna or through a cold bath or any other, a rougher hike one day or a rougher workout one day and then a lighter one. So that keeps, Jeff Volek did it, a paper, published a paper on hormesis?
Okay, I think I've seen that title circulating.
Yeah. Check it out sometime. But that is that is so natural to people to be, to have that stimulation and then deal with it and have that stimulation. If our lives were the same all the time, I think it would be one, boring, but another, that's not the way we're designed.
Right. Really good point. You mentioned cold shower, colds therapy. I did a cold shower here this morning, which I've been doing for a while now, and the water is so much colder in Montana. It was really a challenge in a good way. But I've noticed that for some keto people, there's that whole CPT1 SNP, and I think the Inuit folks. So the inability to transfer fatty acids inside the inner mitochondrial membrane to synthesize acetyl-CoA and then go down into the cycle of ketogenesis, there's a high prevalence of this SNP. And I wonder have you found a correlation between being keto and resilience to cold? I notice I personally get colder easier in the winter. Maybe that could be less body fat, but have you found any correlation there?
Boy, I don't hear that from my clients, but my personal experience and the experience of my husband is we're warmer now. You know, I'll eat a meal, a fat-heavy meal, and like an hour later, I'm sitting there sweating.
Yeah.
And I always used to wear wool socks to bed. Always wear wool socks to bed. I don't wear socks to bed anymore. Or if I do, then they're kicked off in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
And I don't throw the covers off in the middle of the night. It's a whole different thing for me. I was always the one going around with a down vest on, and you know, it's cool in this room right now.
Yeah,
I'm
it's
not
chilly.
the least bit cool. So yeah, I think that we're burning more of that brown fat, and that's the heat producing. Plus, there's thermogenesis going on when you're oxidizing fat. There's more thermogenesis, and I don't remember exactly the biochemistry for that, but I know that that's the way it is.
Yeah, so more energy is lost as heat, so it's warming the body. Okay. Yeah, there must be some individual things. That's me personally, I've noticed that.
It may be, it may be a reduction in body fat stores, or it may just be that there's a difference in metabolism, and it's a more thrifty metabolism because nutrient sensing is saying we're not getting some. I'm just throwing stuff out. I'm just speculating.
No, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So going back to protein, I'm not a huge fan of tracking macros. I think it's great for some people, but I love that intuitive approach. But I love how your book, you outline like some very specific guidelines for people. When it comes to protein, you have a little different approach, and correct me if I'm wrong, looking at lean body mass and calculating protein intake based upon that. What are some targets for people with cancer than maybe without? When it comes to protein?
Very good question, and it comes up all the time, and I could think of 1,000 examples. Okay, so protein, in my book I use lean body mass because I think it's a better gauge. I mean, when you look at the RDA for protein, the dietary allowance, it is based on a certain group, a population of healthy people, and it's meant to hit, I think it's like 97.5% or something of healthy people, meet the needs of healthy people. But it's very conservative. So they use body weight because it's so much easier to get body weight in a huge population than it is to calculate lean body mass. And people can be notoriously bad at calculating lean body mass. So in my book, I do say if you can get a lean body mass measurement, go with that, and 1.0 grams per kilogram of body weight is sufficient protein for most people. But a lot of the people that I work with are either coming out of chemo or going into chemo or have had surgery, had these catabolic things going on. And I don't necessarily want to be in, like you mentioned, it's catabolic. I don't really want them to be as catabolic, so we need to provide some extra protein. So, but like 0.2, 0.3 extra above and beyond is enough, and I think may be enough. And that is often just 4, 5, 6 extra grams. So if you're using body weight, there's no, again, the RDA uses body weight. But when you consider that 2/3 of the population is overweight or obese, why are we using body weight? We should be looking at ideal body weight. And even if you use an imperfect measure like BMI to figure what your ideal body weight is, if you use that and then go 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight, you're in that safe zone. You know, and I want to just throw out a caveat there for pregnant women and women who are breastfeeding. They really need to be working with a specialist if they're going to do a ketogenic diet for any reason.
And why would that be?
Their protein needs are going to be greater, but they also have certain macronutrient needs. I mean, micronutrient needs that may not be met through a ketogenic diet because they're producing milk for another human being that you want to grow. You want it to be anabolic, so they might need a different mix of things. So, but I think most women know that, but not all women know that, and I have a little uncomfortableness with women that may not know that they're pregnant yet, and they start a ketogenic diet. So I would just kind of err on the side of caution there. Sort of like the folate thing.
Totally.
Yeah.
Great point.
You know, we kind of lowered as a country. We did a lot of damage in doing so, but by providing folic acid synthetic vitamin in grains, enriched grain products, we turned that the number of spinal cord neural tube defects down.
Yeah.
We brought it down.
Even though we don't promote folic acid consumption per se, but you know, in low amounts, it seems to have had like a big effect on the population level.
Yeah, much better if people are eating the right foods instead and getting their folate that way.
Yeah, but going back to pregnancy, I mean, what are your thoughts? Obviously, I think that's a great recommendation. Meet with a practitioner, a specialist that is well versed in this area. But John Rowe has talked about how the ketone bodies provide a great carbon substrate for the brain, and so there's that evidence. But then there was an animal model study, I think at University of Oregon in earlier this year in 2018. And they fed pregnant, I think it was mammals, it was monkeys. Did you see that?
No, I didn't.
Anyway, the chow was really, really bad. I mean, it was canola-based and soy-based. So that was the keto chow that they used, but they did show like developmental delay in the primate offspring using this type of high-fat chow.
DHA. Were they getting DHA? Was their diet enriched? Do you know?
No, I don't think so.
Well, if you don't have DHA on board, you're going to have stunted brain development.
Right.
And that was one thing they figured out for formulas. But early on, formulas didn't have DHA. Early on, formulas didn't have medium chain triglycerides. Now, if you look at baby formula, and I don't recommend that people do this, but some people have to do it. If you look at baby formulas, there's medium chain triglycerides in there. So if they had supplemented these, instead of using canola or soy, which are, soy is inflammatory, if they just coconut oil, I mean, it's not a native thing for mice to use, but if they'd used coconut oil with its lauric acid and its medium chain triglycerides, would that have provided enough ketones in a positive kind of way?
Right. Good point.
For brain development, yeah.
Yeah.
You got to provide everything. You can't just like go and say, oh, no, their brains didn't develop, without looking at what the confounding factors were.
Right, and that's why saying high fat or high protein, it's so ambiguous. It doesn't like narrow down the specifics that matter. Like you're saying, these specific chain lengths of fats that are very important in brain development.
And so, was this ketogenic chow or was it high fat chow?
It was high fat chow.
Okay, so I got to get on my soapbox for this one. This is like a really thing I got to get out there. When you read a story, a research paper that says high fat diet, it's like I just kind of move those to the trash. I don't even consider them, because a high fat diet is generally around 45% fat in these mouse models. So they take sometimes they take this mouse model that's genetically engineered to get obese and diabetic, and then they feed it this diet that consists of 45% fat and 30% carbohydrate. And the 30% carbohydrate, 15% of it is sucrose, so it's glucose and fructose, and then 15% of it is straight starch, so it's glucose and glucose. So what is doing the harm there?
Yeah. It's
the combination, and I think that people in our world have figured that out. You can't have a diet as high as 30% carbohydrate and expect to have a good result paired with a high-fat diet. Doesn't matter how good quality the fat is, whether it's saturated or unsaturated, you're not going to get as good an outcome as you would if you go truly ketogenic. And so when it says ketogenic, I'm going to take it a little more seriously, but I'm also going to look at the chow. I saw one study with a bad effect, and I looked at the chow, which you can find because it's in the methods. So I looked at the chow, and it was hydrogenated lard.
Oh my gosh.
And even keto cow, the one that was used in Dr. Seyfried's study, and had been used in a lot because it's what they fed kids. The original version of that was hydrogenated soybean oil. I'm not kidding.
Wow.
And a whole load of synthetic vitamins. So is this like the ideal food to give to a mouse? No wonder the mice that are calorie restricted are doing better, because they're using their own body fat instead of that crap they're being fed.
That's a wonderful point.
Yeah.
Yeah, you really have to dig into the details. A lot of people just skim the abstract, or they look at Science Direct or Medical Express, and they see high fat, and then they say, look at the study, but then you actually have to go to...
It should come with a huge warning sign on it if it says high fat. And so many people, that's one of the the most common things I get in my inbox is people saying, well, this study showed this happening. And my other thing in inbox is, just to go off on a little bit of a tangent, is people showing, oh, ketones did this. Well, I look at the study and it was like in vitro, yeah, so ketones did that to a cell in a manipulated environment, would anybody consider this evidence for like a positive effect using the nutrition guidelines? No, they'd have to have, that would be like, that could be the thing that guides some hypothesis making for the preclinical models, the mouse models. And then that in turn would guide the hypotheses for, human trials or case studies or whatever. But it's never used as evidence. So, why would I see it as evidence?
Yeah, great point. Speaking of tangents, I love this conversation. This is awesome. The Diet Fit study from Stanford. Did you read that?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, that was recently. So we did a review on it on the YouTube channel, but it was very interesting. It was low carb versus low fat. That was one. It was just published at 8 weeks ago. Maybe.
Yeah. I think I may have heard that one.
But they allowed the individuals. There was no quantification. They just say try to go as low as you can go, and they didn't look at body fat. And then they allowed the individuals to, and low as you can go being low fat or low carb, and or high. Sorry, high fat, low carb versus high carb, low fat. And they said there's no difference in outcomes, but they didn't track anything, and they allowed the people to just basically eat whatever they want. And so then the media said, see, there's no difference, but you actually have to download the materials and methods and a secondary supplemental paper. So point of this is there's so many nuances. So you got to work with, follow someone like Miriam or others who are doing the research and digging deeper, because the abstracts are not going to lead you down the right track.
Right, and so we hit paywalls on so many things too. Yeah. So you read the abstract and I just want to dig into the paper. Like I said, when I get into a paper and I look at the methodology and I see there's the mouse chow specified, and then I'll just go and look at the mouse chow. And so I have some of these charts. It's like, you could feed them layers of love brownie, and it would have the same diet composition as what they were fed. And does anybody think that layers of love brownie as an exclusive diet is going to be healthy? No, nobody thinks that. Yeah. So, and we just need we need better education for everyone. I mean, I grew up believing in those guidelines. I grew up thinking, now I was having a healthy diet. I ate a healthy diet. And I had a can of Coke a day. But that was okay because you have this allowed amount of sugar, right? This allowable amount that's supposedly not doing any damage. Well, the only reason I stopped it at the time was because, I've had a history of really problem teeth since I was a little kid. I started eating sugar really early on. And I stopped it because I didn't want to do any further damage to my teeth. And with no other change, and I wasn't looking for weight loss, pretty lean anyway, but with no other change, I dropped a couple of pounds in, a month or a month and a half just from dropping that soda. So it's like, why would we think that there's a safe amount of sugar that people can add to their diets? The New York Times just did this. And they just repeat it so often in the last couple of days. This thing about, I cut out sugar for a month. It's like, no, you cut out added sugar for a month. You didn't look at the naturally occurring sugars that are just as dangerous, in my opinion, eaten in high amounts as the added sugars. Fructose, of course, is particularly dangerous, but all of it is dangerous. So to say that there's a safe allowable amount, no, we should be telling people, we don't think this is really good for you. If you're going to do it at your own risk. And then a lot more people would be, that awareness, creating that kind of awareness could have changed the way I ate much earlier on.
And then affected the trajectory of your life.
Exactly, exactly. I came to this really late. And I'm glad I found it. I'm much more mentally clear than I was. I'm not suffering from those senior moments where, or what did I do with my keys, or what did, that kind of thing even. I see pictures in my head, which is great when I'm trying to recall things. And that just wasn't where I was headed. I was in the herd. Yeah. In the herd.
So the core message is maybe do your own homework and don't trust the government when it comes to nutrition often, or?
Yeah, I'd say we can't trust the guidelines. And right now, please please everybody, there's this short comment period. I'm not sure when it's up. Do you know when it's up?
Nina's, she's working on that Nutrition Coalition.
Is it the end of this month?
I think, end of March.
End of March. Okay, and you've gotten something out on your site already?
Yeah, I've been,
okay.
That's amazing.
All right. Yeah, we've been like tweeting and Facebooking it and everything. But yeah, we have this limited period of time. And off on this other day. When I was preparing some materials and I dug deep into this and I was looking at all of these different versions, these different editions of the guidelines, different editions in book form, because things can change on the internet. But I bought the books and I'm going through them, and I found one year, and I think it was 2005, but I wouldn't swear to it, where it basically said, hey, you don't need carbs. You know, we have zero requirement for carbs. We have this, this protein target, but we'll make the right amount of glucose. We'll make physiological normal amounts of glucose through even zero carb diets. And then like the next year, that was gone. And it was replaced with, well, the reason why we have these guidelines for 130 grams is that your brain needs it for the brain needs glucose. And I had to answer that on, you probably didn't, going where you were, but I had to, in my graduate course, I had to continuously
battle
that and the quizzes. I had to go against what I knew on quizzes to say that the brain needed 130 grams of, no, it needs the energy equivalent of 130 grams. It does not need those 130 grams as sugar. It needs the energy equivalent, and up to 60-70% of that can be met with ketones. There's a small amount that does need to be met by glucose, but our bodies make it. So we strip the glycerol off the triglycerides and we send that to the liver, and that becomes the sugar that our bodies need, the glucose that our bodies need. So can you imagine if somebody is eating exclusively meat, how much of that is getting converted? Because the proteins, the amino acids from proteins, can't be stored. So they get converted into glucose and put back out into the system. So it may only look like a small difference with a finger prick, but it's relentless. It's time after time after time. And if you're insulin sensitive, then the insulin stimulation that you get, I shouldn't say insulin stimulation, the rise in insulin that's associated with proteins, because proteins are anabolic.
Yeah.
So you get that rise in insulin that's associated with all of them, even more so with dairy and egg proteins. And that, I think what some people look at is, well, it's not enough to suppress ketones. But I don't know. If you're doing the math and you're doing the tracking, you're going to see that rise in glucose. And so when I compare like a classic ketogenic diet with like a modified Atkins or a more liberalized ketogenic diet, and I see that there's about 12 milligrams per deciliter difference between the average of those two diets, I go, well, that 12 milligrams per deciliter may mean the difference between a brain tumor growing and a brain tumor not growing. It may not mean much in the carnivore world, but as far as the cancer goes, it might mean the difference between the tumor staying stable and the tumor growing. So and also the glutamine. The glutamine issue is huge in cancer, and that's my fear about that movement, is that, okay, you got to nuance it for cancer. You have to nuance it for people who are older. You have to nuance it for people who are buying poor quality meats, or living on. I talked to one guy just yesterday, and he said, "Yeah, I see. It's not just the foods. I thought I was doing okay on Atkins. I'd stop at Wendy's and I'd buy a burger and I'd throw away the bun. But now I understand that that's not really the best quality food that I could be eating, because we're doing so much better at home."
Yeah, that may be keto from a macro perspective, but you were missing out on some of the other perspectives. So that 12 nanograms per DL, you were saying, is that glucose or was that insulin?
You can't measure insulin in that way. That's glucose. So it's milligrams per deciliter. So it's like if you do a finger prick and you're in ketosis, and with a strict carbohydrate restriction, really rigorous carbohydrate restriction, you might see a number around 65 or 70. But if you're not, you might see a number around 85. And for the people that in the athletes, is that going to matter? No,
They're
probably
moving enough.
not. It's not going to matter because they're not getting the spikes from the carb loading and all of that. So they're not doing that to their bodies. But as far as a brain tumor goes, that just may be enough stimulation to open up those pathways, plus the extra glutamine. And glutamine, I have to stress, is not just through protein-containing foods. Glutamine is also cancer robs glutamine from its neighbors. That's not necessarily true for in a normal non-cancer person, although you do release a lot of glutamine through muscle breakdown too. So when people are doing this for cancer, at least in the beginning, I do say, oh, please just stick to light or moderate exercise and leave the vigorous for later, just enough to stimulate and keep that muscle mass while you're going through your treatment.
It seems like the glutamine world is somewhat controversial because we know that, like you're talking about, cancer cells can utilize this, but glutamine does offer support for the GI tract.
It does.
So you talk about this in the book, and can you summarize what you the perspective?
Yeah. Sure. It's I don't think there's a controversy around it. It's just that it's a double-edged sword. Like you said, we need it for immune function. We, our immune system in the gut is about 85% of our protection. So we don't want things, we want to have a really healthy gut. So that's one of the things that Tom Seyfried is really big on right now. He just needs the funding to get there. He says, he calls it the front door and the back door. So he says, it's one thing to shut down glucose coming in the front door. But if you leave the back door open, glutamine's going to get in. And, and like I said, it's a double-edged sword. So you can't use drugs that are going to shut down every day this glutamine. So he's talking about pulsing it. So you do a certain, the press part of this, he calls it press pulse therapy. So the press part of this is the diet. So you're pressing with the diet, and then you're pulsing. So you're pulsing with some things that are going to restrict glucose further, like 2-deoxyglucose, dichloroacetate, and then you're also coming in, you let that door back open for a little bit and you close down the back door for the glutamine. And, and that he thinks is going to be where we can actually wipe out even stem cells doing that. So, so I really support his work. I think this combination metabolic therapies makes so much more sense to me than attacking this time and this mutation that time, and now through what we've done, we've made another mutation there, and we're gonna and now you're out of it makes me crazy. You look at drugs like, if I can name names, Opdivo and the commercial they have on TV. It's like the chance to live longer, and it's like it shows like a happy couple enjoying their grandchildren in the park, and okay, so maybe you get I think it's 2.5 months. So, added survival benefit, median survival, added survival. But a lot of that time you're dealing with, this thyroid that's going crazy, and you're in the bathroom most of the time with diarrhea. So it's a chance to live longer, but don't dupe people with this stuff. It's not going to give you years more of life. And once that's done, and you're not responding to that anymore, then where do you go? If you haven't addressed the underlying cause of this imbalance, of this, this formation of mutations, the inflammation and the insulin resistance and all the things that contribute to that, if you haven't addressed that, then you're not going to come out on it. And I'm not saying that keto is a cure for cancer. As a matter of fact, I always tell people it's an adjunct therapy unless you're on a watch and wait protocol. Some low-grade brain tumors and some other cancers are on a watch and wait protocol.
And which cancers seem, in your research and working with the clients, seem to respond most favorably to keto?
That's another question. Thank you. I get to ask that a lot. People think it's only good for brain cancer, and I'll tell you why. Because it's so dramatic in brain cancer. Like I said, in 3 months, we could see MRI to MRI. We could see, I was telling you that before, we could see the difference in our son's MRI. This one, explosive growth and metabolic activity, lit up like a Christmas tree. This one all calmed down, shrunk back, quiet. So in that case, it's a really dramatic. You can see it. And one of the reasons being brain cancer has such a poor prognosis. So You know, if you're living longer than the median of 14 and a half months, then yeah, wow, you might have done something a little different. And most of the people I work with brain cancer are living well beyond, like 6 years, 4 years. I mean, I can think of, it's not just onesies and twosies. I'm thinking of people that are way out from their diagnosis.
Wow.
And they've all done something, and it's all been a little different. So I can't generalize as to what it was, but the thing that was the same between them all was limiting the protein and not falling prey to carb creep or even protein creep. So, you know, understanding, because maybe they got off track a little bit at one point, and then they got a bad MRI and they went right back to it.
Wow.
And they're doing well. Now, newly diagnosed breast cancer, you know, 15 years from now, I can tell you whether or not it helped with newly diagnosed breast cancer. What I do know is that the whole lifestyle package that goes along, because it's not just about the diet, but if you're, you know, if you were physically inactive, had poor sleep, your circadian rhythms were off, your immune system was shot, you know, you had all these other things, obese, you know, all of those things going on, and then you get cancer. And if you change all of those things, then, you know, 15 years out, are you going to be the one, you know, you're going to be in that 14% that has the recurrence? Hopefully not, because you've changed, you've pulled yourself out of the herd, you've changed the terrain, as some people call it in the naturopathic world. They call it the terrain. You've changed the terrain. It's not as conducive to cancer growth. You know, it's just, when I think of like looking back on what we did with our son, and the first, I mean, it didn't matter to us. It was all about the macros. We were giving him like ham every day, and you know, hot dogs, and you know, we were using soybean mayonnaise. We didn't know. We were just like trying to hit those macros, and then to see that, and then over time, it's like, well, no, we're not going to give them that. We're going to give them something a little better quality, and we're not going to use that mayonnaise anymore. We're going to use this instead. And then with the adults that I work with, then they start, like, when they get into this world, then they start finding people like you, and they start to, you know, to look at circadian rhythms, and they start to look at improving their sleep. Got your Oura ring on? Yep.
Sleep was awful last night. There was some noisy thing in this Airbnb. Anyway, it's all good.
Yeah, so they're making these other changes. And like I said about this guy that had done the Atkins diet in the past, and you know, and thought he was doing okay with eating Wendy burgers. You know, to make these changes, and even if it doesn't save your life, it's such a better life with what you have. And that was I mean, if I could stress one thing, we did a lot of things wrong in how we approached this with our son, because that was in 2007, and there wasn't this information, this explosion of information. But it gave us time, and it gave us good quality of lifetime. And we understood how precious every minute of that was. And we just like ditched our jobs, took our little guy to Mexico. I mean, we just did things that were important to us, and we wouldn't have had that time. We would have been in the hospital dealing with his, you know, crashing blood numbers and infections he was going to get from this palliative care. You know, we were going to be dealing with that instead of enjoying every moment on the beach. And some of those, I put some of those pictures on my website of our beach time together. And it wasn't just then. I mean, it was even local here. You know, he could ride his bike again, and you know, go to the farmer's market. He could interact with people. All those things were out the window when they wanted to move him to palliative care. So, yeah, the quality of life we had, and we kicked the can down the road an amazing 6.5 years.
That's amazing. Yeah. Congratulations on that.
Yep, there was nothing else that was going to give us 6 years. So when you say, what cancers it's going to work for, okay, that's one right there. And the others, time will tell. And also, we need research, because I believe that there are a few cancers out there that we may not be helping at all.
That was going to be my next kind of follow-up question. We know cancers are very thrifty and can evade immune responses and all that. It seems reasonable that some cancers can maybe use ketones as a fuel to thrive.
Yeah.
Do we know yet which cancers, or is that?
We have some cell studies, and we have some beginnings of some animal models, like with the V600E mutation in melanoma. But then if you look at having done the diet with people with or without that mutation, sometimes you don't see a whole lot of difference. So are there other aspects of the diet besides the ketones that might be beneficial, like, the insulin, the glucose and insulin being lower, and the improvements in immune system function and other things that go along with this, with a healthier ketogenic plan. And so maybe for those people, just moving to the point, like a very low level of ketosis, a nutritional ketosis, really low level. So they're burning fat, but not necessarily creating a lot of ketones. If the cells, like in that particular case, it looks like this, in vitro anyway, they can use ketones. Mm-hmm. But in a living system, when you take a cell and it just is separated out, things that are, and they manipulate the environment, that's going to be different than when they start to move it into the system. But it did concern me because they did see the same effect in the mouse model. Mm-hmm. So we need more research. There may be other cancers too.
And again, that's
V600E. It's a specific mutation that's seen in melanoma, and it's also seen in a couple of other cancers. You know how it's like, okay, we find this pathway and we'll target this pathway. So it's like they do this gene testing so that they can take off-label drugs and use them if they were approved for, like Avastin's never been approved for brain cancer, but it's used for brain cancer and shouldn't be used for brain cancer. But anyway, they identify this genetic mutation, and now they can take a drug that was developed for that genetic mutation for another cancer, and they can justify and maybe even get reimbursement for using it for this cancer because it's the same mutation. So it really benefits the pharmaceutical companies to have a because their clinical trial is like Opdivo is a good example. That was non-small cell lung cancer that had been previously treated with X, Y, and Z, and now you were at this point. But I have clients that have opted to take Opdivo for brain cancer or for other cancers that are not the lung cancer that it was developed for, and they get it. If they can justify it to the insurance company, they get it paid for. And these things are like hundreds of thousands of dollars over a course of treatment. And the diet, people complain, not us, but people just like, they say, oh, yours is an expensive diet. It's like, I eat less protein now and better quality than I ate before. So, where's the added expense here? So I buy, organic tomatoes instead. So where's the added expense here, especially when you think about what it costs for diabetes drugs. I just can't understand, the 20-cent difference in broccoli or something.
Yeah. Well, and the increased productivity garnered from being keto will, you'll probably make more money, have more energy, quality of life is better. So
fewer sick days, better recovery. And we both, for the first time, for the first time in like 30 years, I had the seasonal flu. And we bounced back.
A couple days, kind of.
Yeah. A couple days. The fatigue stayed with us for longer. The fatigue was there, but it wasn't as noticeable unless we were working out or taking a long walk or something.
Yeah.
But I mean, being in our 60s and bouncing back like that, that's not really what's expected.
Right. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
Definitely want to dive a little bit more into cancer and kind of the landscape of traditional oncology, but you hit on something with the glycerol, and when fats are liberated from our own body fat, you mentioned that the triglycerides go into making ketones, and that glycerol can make glucose. I think that's a brilliant, and you have the charts and the science in the book, which is lovely for people.
Thank you.
But so for the cells, like maybe I think there's some kidney cells, erythrocytes, right, and then retina. There's a few cells.
Lens tissue. It solely relies on glucose, and like I said, about 30% of brain tissue is reliant on glucose. Yeah.
So our body has
lactate. You can use lactate as well.
Okay. So we shouldn't be too scared about, going for extended periods of time, maybe for therapeutic reasons, fasting and or very low carb. Our body has the ability, the safeguard mechanisms to make glucose for these cells.
Yeah.
It's built in.
Yep. Gosh, and fasting is another one of those things that in my book and in working with people that I throw in a lot of caveats. And you know, when somebody gets diagnosed with cancer, quite often they are just so overwhelmed, so freaked out by this diagnosis, and they want to act immediately. This whole process of getting rid of it is taking too long, and they come on the diet, and they come on this thing about fasting, and they think that they can just do this like 12-day fast and the cancer is going to go away. So maybe 12-day fast might help as far as prevention and wiping out cells before they start to actually build up to the point where they are a cancer. But once you have the cancer, you can impact that, like I said, angiogenesis. You can do the housekeeping with fasting that's going to clear out a lot of dead cells. But there's no reason for me to think that there aren't going to be a few of these little microscopic ones floating around. And so we got to figure out some other strategy for dealing with them long term. And you know, when people go in different directions, they can combine ketogenic diet with, you know, conventional care. Sometimes that's real tricky. Or they can combine it with alternative. I guess it just rips my heart up when I see somebody with a really curable cancer, like with a surgery, who could do a fast for, you know, even if it was a week fast or a 5-day fast before they went in for the surgery. I mean, we just today, actually just a few days ago, a paper got accepted, GBM. Yeah. Glioblastoma multiforme, a really aggressive form of brain cancer, case study, clinic in Egypt. And I was working with the authors on this. And that guy did a 72-hour fast. And he did 900 calories a day ketogenic prior to his resection. And he had a good resection. And also the tumor that they resected had different histology than the normally resected glioblastoma. When they find it, they go, oh, we got to get this out right away, go right in, take it out. So when you compare something that was removed immediately to something that was removed after only a few weeks of a ketogenic diet, a low-calorie, carb restrict, you know, like I said, just 72-hour and then this, and you look at those and you go, something's going on here.
Already in that short period of time.
And I think that was one of the strong points of the paper. The editors wanted us to kind of tone it down a little bit, because they thought, it was like, oh, you can't be sure that that's why you saw that. But just look at the people that know how to look at the tissue, they can look at that and judge for themselves what the difference was. So I'm hoping that even though these are just case studies and they're not well controlled, and there's, you know, and in Egypt they don't even do blood testing because they can't afford the materials for it. So even though there's a lot of flaws to this, when you keep looking at this stuff and you keep putting it out there and people keep sliding it under the nose of people that know how to look at this, I'm hoping that over time that's going to make a difference in the right direction. Yeah,
and information like your book and videos and all that is going to help people as well. One thing you talked about in the book that I think is interesting, you hit on it right there, how a prolonged fast may affect the stem cells and the precancerous cells. And if we want to compare kind of what happens with the traditional, you know, blast it, kill it, oncological model, right? Sure. You know, yeah, you might blast some of those cancer cells, but those lingering cells can adapt and they become stronger and will kind of get you on the back end. So I love that. I haven't heard it, you know, read that before. I think that's brilliant. Can you kind of talk?
I can use a perfect example from the brain tumor world, and that is that everyone with an aggressive stage 4 glioblastoma multiforme, GBM, is told that the standard of care is surgery followed by concurrent radiation and temozolomide, Temodar. So they're told that this is the standard of care. And yet the guy that came up with this protocol says, if you don't have this particular, if you're not a methylator, you don't have this particular thing going on, Temodar is really not going to give you even one extra day. Not even one extra day. Temodar actually improves outcomes in brain tumors by 2.5 months. So it gives you 2.5 months of time that you're on this drug and going to the clinic all the time. So, and anyway, the downside of Temodar, and this isn't, I'm convinced that they don't care because they're just happy with their 2.5 months. It's significant. It reaches a level of significance in brain tumor. But Temodar turns a tumor with 50 or 60 different mutations. That's what a GBM has, 50 or 60 different mutations in it. How are you going to target each one of those? But anyway, it takes that tumor and it turns it into a tumor that can have upward of 1,000 mutations. Whoa. So hypermutation, it's true. It's not, I'm not just like speculating on this one. This is what it can do. And one of the people that I mentioned, the one that was 8 years out, since then they have figured out, I mean back then they didn't test for methylation, but since then figured out that she was a methylator, but she had the standard of care, she had a good resection, and they started her on the radiation and the chemotherapy, and a couple of weeks into it she developed an allergic reaction to the drug and couldn't continue with the drug. So that's when her husband was frantic looking and he found the diet and she went on the diet.
What a blessing in disguise.
I know. That's what I'm thinking. It's like, if she had, would she be 8 years out if she had been able to tolerate that drug, or what would it have done? Right. But the thing, and I tell people this now when I start with a new client with brain tumor, I go, okay, if you go into that meeting and you hear this, oh, you know, MGMT positive, you're a methylator, the drug is known to have a better response. We're talking that 2.5 months there. But they don't really say that. But if you go into that meeting and they don't mention that, you probably are not a methylator, because I can't think of a single time when it wasn't brought up if somebody was a methylator. Or you know, there's another mutation that's common to the IDH1 mutation, but the Temodar is, you know, that 2.5 months, significant in their world. Put the blinders on. We're going to do Temodar. And these other people aren't going to benefit. So you might as well, right from the start, and I've gotten much more vocal about that. It's not just nutrition I talk about with people. I will put myself on the line on this stuff, I guess because nobody was willing to put themselves on the line when we were going through it. But what are they going to do? Get my little house here in Montana? I don't know. So I will talk to people about that. And it's like, you know, right off the bat, why put yourself in the possibility of the situation? Ask them for another protocol. Ask them, push them a little. They will come up. If they know that you're against the Temodar, they will come up with another protocol for you.
You know, I think when it comes to surviving cancer, there's a mindset mentality shift that needs to occur, and you talk about it in the book, and you just articulated it there, is that you need to become your own, you know, your own practitioners, or make sure that the doctor's listening to you as well and do your own research. Because I think, I don't know, I mean, I can see how having the diagnosis would be very disempowering. It would affect your self-esteem, and you would just want to let the expert do. They're the expert. You just, it's like someone, you know, contractor building a house. Like, you don't know anything about it, but you're saying, no, you need to really kind of challenge the status quo a little bit. And, you know, that's kind of a new construct when it comes to navigating the medical system. For a long time, we've put doctors up here and whatever they say we do. So is that a big part of?
Yeah, it's a huge part. And I'd like to talk a little bit about that. But what you just said kicked me off in another direction, and that is, like 150 years ago, did you go to a doctor if you had a stomach ache? Did you go? I mean, they weren't there as a resource, especially in rural communities. There weren't those kinds of resources. So people were much more reliant on their own, on themselves and their families and their communities in order to, you know, to deal with these health issues that came up. Yeah. But we've been trained out of that. At least my generation got trained out of that. We were told the doctors are the experts. They put up this wall. I'm sorry, but they do. I'm sorry for, you know, to say that, but they put up this wall, and you're on one side and they're on the other side. And the families that are treated differently are those, they're doctors. They are doctors with cancer. And they are treated differently, there's no doubt about it. There's more respectful conversation going on between them. They're allowed more time with the oncologist. It's a whole different ballgame. And I understand why that happens. But for those of us who don't have those kinds of connections, yeah, it was a really hard thing for me to go into the oncology office, you know, and advocate for a ketogenic diet for my son, and then be told that it was basically bullshit, and that, you know, I should just go along with the herd. And you know, it was intimidating. But it was like, what if, you're not telling me that there's anything wrong with doing it. You're just saying it's not going to work. So in the big picture, do I want to try something that you're saying isn't going to work, but it's your opinion? Maybe it'll work. And if it doesn't, what harm have I done? So,
was that intuition or was that research? Like what compelled you to, have that conviction that no, this is a viable option?
I wasn't convinced it was a viable option. It was a what do they call it, a Hail Mary pass or something. Like I didn't know it was a viable option. But what I knew was that they were doing this diet with a population of kids who were not adults, because a lot of the research, all the research starts with adults and filters down, but they were doing this with a population of compromised kids and doing it for epilepsy, and they had a long history at that point. And they had identified the side effects, they identified the protocol for using it, they knew how to do it, they knew how, there was a consensus statement on how to use this diet for epilepsy. So it's like, okay, if we play by these same rules, maybe we'll get some kind of slowdown here. Maybe we can just impact it enough so we get to have a breath and look at what we're going to do next. Well, there really wasn't another next for us, but we had, like I said, that over 6 years of having that extra quality of life time. Not all of it was good quality of life, but a lot of it was. So advocacy is a big part of it, and I sort of touch on it in my book, but I've done a couple of presentations now on diet skeptics and saboteurs, and those are that's on my website, which is I really like that one. It's geared for people who are having to go and talk to their doctors about it. It's empowering, is what it is. And then I did a TEDx talk, and that's online now too, and that's advocating for a therapeutic ketogenic diet in cancer. And I stress therapeutic there because I really don't think that like an Atkins diet is going to do it, for the reasons that I said. With Atkins people, they know how to cut the carbs, but they replace those carbs mostly with more protein. They don't really add a whole lot of fat, at least that's what the studies show. So it's a therapeutic keto, but I also see it as huge potential for those of us who are starting to feel the effects of that relentless, march of aging, and I think that we can slow that down too. I mean, there is research on that in primates, and the awful thing that they did was stress in the studies. Oh yeah, well, we've done these studies now, we found that it didn't really extend life. It's like, well, but did it extend the quality of life? These animals did not develop the chronic diseases that degrade life towards the end of life. So instead of being able to, instead of like developing these diseases and then just kind of limping off the cliff, I see it as, okay, so maybe you won't live one day longer. Maybe you will, but maybe you won't live one day longer, but you're going to be zooming off that cliff. You're not going to be limping.
Hobbling with 5 medications and hearing aids and everything.
Yeah. Just
great point.
Yeah. So the like we did with our son, if it can extend that good quality of lifetime, and for us it has. For my husband and I, it has. Actually, he's gotten visibly healthier over the time that he's been on the diet, and I feel much more mental clarity. I was feeling pretty foggy. I was getting to be pretty foggy, and I don't have that fogginess anymore. Yeah. And you had mentioned fasting before, and I kind of got off track there, so I'm going to bring it back to that for a minute. So there are some nuances. I don't like to see people fast if they are responsible for a child in their home, because sometimes they don't do it right and they get a little dizzy, or for other reasons they might get dizzy, lightheaded. They may not act responsibly in terms of the care of their children. So I say, do it at a time when somebody else, another adult, can assess where you're at and be responsible for your children. So that's a real strong caveat for me, is protect your kids first.
I remember reading that in the book last night. That's a great tip. I wouldn't have even thought of that.
Yeah. So, and then there are some people that just shouldn't fast. If you're cachexic in an anabolic state, fasting is not going to save you. So, and the ketogenic diet is not a weight gain diet. When you think about its history, the ketogenic diet, it mimics fasting. So fasting is a state of low nutrition availability. So by packing in, by stuffing yourself with fats and getting, to try to gain weight, you're not really taking advantage of that evolutionary adaptation that we have. So if somebody's coming to me with really low weight, I'm going to recommend against fasting. We're going to do intermittent fasting with a wide window, and we're going to carefully control the kinds of fats that they're taking in, and we're going to look at cutting carbs. We just look at the big picture of how else can we impact. If we can't do it with strict ketogenic right now, can we move you closer to it and just really clean up what you're eating and clean up all the other lifestyle stuff at the same time? So I think it's really interesting, and I'm very grateful to Longo for the work that he's done on the fasting mimicking diet. I personally wouldn't want that diet. I could design my own for a lot less money, and it would be better quality foods, and I wouldn't have the synthetic vitamins in it. It has a place in the world of people following standard diets who are wanting to improve metabolic health or to fast around chemotherapy. Then it's valuable there if they're not going to do ketogenic, but ketogenic is so much more powerful. So right now I've been working with some people, and I'm just doing it like onesies at a time, and I'm going to sort of develop a better protocol for it. And it has to be flexible. Like this one woman in her 70s that I'm working with just came off a 5-day fast, but she did it she knows how to do it, and she did it with 500 calories a day of good quality fats. And she identified the one fat that did raise her glucose more than she wanted it to in that 500 calories a day. So it's a modified fast, but that's what the fasting mimicking diet is too.
What fat was that, by the way, that raised your blood glucose?
It was cocoa. It was cocoa butter. Coconut butter. Excuse me.
There's a little bit of glucose in there.
Yes, there's a little bit more glucose in that. Yeah.
Interesting.
So, yeah, and it was a significant raise, but she's had sensitivity to other things too. But she's in her 70s. She's low weight. Yeah, a total water-only fast would have been inappropriate, but she came out of this really good and feeling good. And hopefully it's going to impact, she's going to get some testing done, hopefully it's impacted her markers. But the thing I was going to say about that Longo is that on his website, to sell this product, you just scroll down in this one, I can't remember the name of the page, but you scroll down and there's the charts that show like the impact that it had on IGF-1, the impact it has on stem cells to do this type of fasting. So it's like, okay, now we've got the stats for it. Thank you.
Customize your own higher quality.
Customize your own and expect that you're going to have at least as good a result as those charts. But those charts are just so beautiful, so easy to understand.
Yeah.
And
good marketing.
Yeah, good marketing. Yeah. Excellent marketing.
And good research too. Yeah.
Yes, it was trial.
Totally. Yeah. And the proceeds are going towards more research. So I totally get the model and everything. But to commercialize, my wife has a food company, and it's very challenging to create healthy, stable food products that aren't loaded with stuff. So I totally understand the limitations and things there. One thing that comes up a lot, and you have a whole chapter on it in your book, is constipation. I wonder if we can, this interview has been amazing, by the way, Miriam. Can we finish off with constipation? Because I think that's something that doesn't get talked about enough. And we know gut health is so important, and we want to be defecating and all that. So what are some key insights for constipation?
Well, I put some stats in the book on that I got from Mayo Clinic on how prevalent it is in the population. And then when people hear about ketogenic diet, they hear it's constipating. So it's like, okay, it's not necessarily, it doesn't need to be any more constipating than where you were at before. So let's figure out where the sources are of this constipation. So one of the things I find is that people, they switch to using like almond milk, and almond milk is quite often fortified with calcium carbonate. Cut your stomach acid, contributes to constipation. Two things that you don't want to have happen in any diet, let alone a ketogenic diet. So you're there. Some people will over supplement with psyllium husk, and it's like, oh God, you might be impacting your nutrient absorption doing that. So let's get a natural part of the food. If you can use flaxseed or chia seed, that's going to be a better fiber. And you get the fiber from avocados. I think there's 7 grams of fiber In an avocado? Yeah. I think it's right up there. And you're getting it from, broccoli and lettuces, the different leafy lettuces. So you're getting some fiber, but I don't think we really need to overdo the fiber. It doesn't really, it may promote regularity, but it doesn't necessarily ease constipation. There's a big difference. And some of the soluble fibers might actually slow things down too much. Too. So, I don't push the fiber. It should be a natural part of your diet. But I do say, strengthen those abs. Strong abs, less constipation. A daily walk, less constipation. I know when I'm traveling that, if I don't get my normal routine in, it may not feel the same, but it's not even true constipation. If you're used to having 2 or 3 or 4 bowel movements a day with the foods you've been eating, count on the fact that you're not going to have that many because you're not creating as much waste. Yeah. So that's not necessarily a bad thing as long as you're not straining. And that's the other thing. It's like on the other end of the spectrum, people might have diarrhea, and I check their magnesium. So some magnesium supplements like oxide, poorly absorbed. Instead, they draw water into the colon. So they act just like, any other stool softener would. And that can help ease constipation. So if they're constipated, I'm going to suggest adding magnesium rather than something else. Let's try this first. Either magnesium oxide or, better yet, magnesium citrate, because that will still bring water into the stool, and that's a good magnesium supplement. And I think everybody needs magnesium. So yeah, it's like, okay, we'll try this dose. I have a whole sheet of what these different magnesium supplements do, because for people who are experiencing the other problem, these won't soften stool, but these will soften stool right here. So that's another thing. How you sit on the toilet, it makes a difference in whether or not you can deal with your constipation. But I say what you want to do is drink enough water, so stool softener, take in enough salt during the day, keep your electrolytes in balance, keep your system running. It comes down to the same thing I said before. When you have muscles and doing what they're intended to do, it's whole body regulation instead of just picking one issue.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, so look at it through the network biology framework, basically, as a system.
Yeah. Love it.
All right, man, we could talk all day about this stuff, I'm sure. We have 3 final questions we've asked every guest now. We're at 220 something. What would be, speaking of the lifestyle, we want to get, morning routines. We know successful people have kind of rituals and things they do every morning. I want to add a little slightly different spin because we're talking about cancer. If you were to give the advice to someone that was recently diagnosed with cancer or it has cancer themselves, what would be a morning routine you'd want them to start implementing?
Okay. I'd like to see that they get up at approximately the same time every day and that they drink some water when they get up. And if they drink coffee or tea, make it a bulletproof coffee or tea. And I don't mean the name brand stuff. I'm saying you can do it with some combination of fats and oils that's going to give you 2 or 2.5 tablespoons of fat in that one drink, at a minimum. And allow that to delay your breakfast. Or I shouldn't call it breakfast. Allow it to delay your first meal. And I know that's not realistic for some people because they have jobs and they have to and then maybe you get it to the point where you're delaying it to the lunch break. But fats will do that. And as a matter of fact, when somebody gets up in the morning and they have a fasting blood glucose, if they drink one of these drinks a couple hours later, their glucose is actually lower. In the absence of having any carbohydrate or protein, it's just the fats in the drink. Yeah. And so then, have that meal with about half of the protein you're going to have for the day, and then maybe a mid-afternoon snack, maybe not, and then another meal, and quit eating. If you're sort of middle-aged, quit eating at least 3 hours before bedtime. If you're moving up, I'd say 4.5 hours is even better. We've really moved but we have the freedom to do that. We've really moved our mealtime much earlier. And it feels so much better going to bed at night. So then going to bed at a reasonable time and staying away from the computer. And I try to set a curfew of 8 o'clock for me, so that it gives me a couple hours before bedtime of not stressing myself at the computer, even though I have a blue light filter on it. Yeah. I think not everybody's built for meditation, but everybody can follow their own breath. Everybody can sit in a chair, even if it's just for 3 minutes, and follow their breath. And it really calms down the autonomic nervous system. And people with cancer tend to have that hyped up for good reason.
Yeah.
So, developing this routine, paying attention to circadian rhythms, understanding your own body, tweaking all the little biohacks that, there's big biohacks too, but then there's the little ones. I mean, we've really cleaned up our physical environment. Mm-hmm. It's different than it was. We're more mindful of those things. So, making a better, you got here somehow. Right. And I don't care what it was that got you here, but it's what is going to be important is the next step. And are you going to make this commitment to trying this for a month and see how you feel? And if you're not feeling good, and regardless of what's happening in your body, if you're not feeling good, this may not be something you want to continue. Or at that point you go, okay, I'm not feeling good, maybe I'm doing something wrong, and then trying to troubleshoot what it is that you're doing. And I meet with a lot of people in that situation. Mm. So I hope I've answered your question.
That's brilliant. You've expanded it much greater and provided much more context, which is awesome. I love that. Herbert Benson wrote this book, The Relaxation Response. I read that in like 2008, I think, and that's what kind of got me into meditation. But I think he studied outcomes in cancer patients and found a dramatic difference in those that, maybe they're not meditating, but they're being present and mindful.
Yes. And the other thing I think it does is it brings you to a place of, I can't call it acceptance, because that's not the right word. For some people it is acceptance, but the connotation there is that you're giving up, and I don't want it like that. But it brings people to a different place where they can look at their own life in the context of a bigger picture. And it's like, yes, we are all going to meet that fate someday. None of us is getting around that. Mm-hmm. So how we meet it, what we do from the point that we start thinking about it till we actually die. I know, for one, I'm much less afraid of my own death. I'm much less concerned about mortality, having watched what my son went through. He died in our arms. And it's like, there's a lot worse ways to go than dying in the arms of the parents that love you. Mm-hmm. So, but there are a lot of people that just aren't built for it, Mike, and so I say, just follow the breath because it has the same effect. As a matter of fact, for people who just they just don't want to hear any of this spiritual stuff, they don't want any spiritual connotation to it at all, and that's relatively few. But I have this one video that I send them, and it's this very no-nonsense nurse. She looks like a I don't know, battalion leader or something, and she just sort of, this is what it's going to do, and this is how you do it. And it's 10 minutes. Wow. And I know that was one of the things I did with my son, is sometimes, I didn't have any time to take a shower most days, but I could find the time to just sit with him, my arms around him. He just loved that, and we would just both breathe together. We'd get our breathing in sync, and we'd talk about how our hearts were tied together with a big bow. Cool. And that was I'm so glad we got to that point. Mm-hmm. And I wouldn't have necessarily, except I was so aware of his mortality. Yeah.
Gosh, that's amazing. That's the whole HeartMath Institute talks about that coherence between people. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Have you read the book by Eugene O'Kelly, I believe, Chasing Daylight?
No.
He was a CEO of a big accounting firm and was told I think it was GBM, he had the summer to live. And he talks about creating perfect moments every day, and like a perfect moment, with your son like that. That's really profound.
If I can say, it was 6 years ago this month that we were out on a panga, a little fishing boat in Mexico, in the Baja, and we were the only boat out there, flat, morning, and the pilot of the boat cut the engine, and a cow, a gray whale cow, came up to the boat, brought her baby up, pushed him up against the boat, and my son, we all took turns touching these magnificent animals. But you talk about a moment, finding a moment. That was our moment. So that's my place that I go to. That's the picture that's in the book. Mm-hmm. That's our son on the panga.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I'll have to review that.
On that day, It was March 12th, so it's like pretty close to
Wow, that's amazing.
6 years ago.
Speaking of Mexico, one question we like to ask everyone is to try and figure out what's like your top resource when it comes to a herb nutrient or a supplement or just a whole food. So if you were going to travel to Mexico next month, to go on vacation, what's something that you would be in your suitcase that you just
in my suitcase? Well, we actually do travel, not this year, but we have traveled. We had a place down there for a while. So I bring a multivite, but I don't take it every day. And I think fish oil is important, but sometimes you've got enough fish in Mexico, different than Montana. But as far as something I would have to, and you don't need the vitamin D.
Right.
Yay.
It's covered,
magnesium. I think I take magnesium with me. K2 probably. I can't think of like specific.
Are you a big MCT oil fan?
Oh yeah, okay. Yeah. MCT and coconut oil. I take MCT powder with me wherever I go because I sometimes need that boost. And actually, I take ketone supplements now with me when I travel. So I would probably put those in. That wasn't an option when we were doing it, but I would probably take those with me too. So, but mostly, it's much more fun to find what they have, find what you need where you're at.
Yeah.
As long as you don't have a disease that you're trying to treat, and then you got to bring that stuff with you.
Yeah, that's a great point. Awesome. So final question here. If you were in an elevator ride with a parliament member, a politician, and thinking big picture, they turned to you and said, Miriam, I'm going into a meeting right now to help my constituents. We're talking about improving the health of our folks. What's like the highest hit rate lifestyle or nutrition tip that you would want them to know?
Nutrition tip? That we have grown, we've been raised in an environment with too much sugar and too many refined carbohydrates, and we have come to see this as normal. So the small changes that we've made, the incremental changes that we've made in our guidelines over the last couple of decades have not been very helpful, and we need a sea change. We need a completely different way of looking at this. We need to turn it upside down.
Love it. And if they said, okay, what's the first thing that you'd want to change? I mean, the guidelines in particular or consumption patterns? Like, do you think there's nutrition, toxins, that you mentioned computers at night? What has the highest hit rate, you think?
Well, as far as the nutrition guidelines go, if you're talking lifestyle, then that's a package. And we've just got to get it out there, what we feel are like the best tips. And I've kind of summarize them a little bit. But as far as the nutrition goes, it really is just dialing back on the market responds to the needs, to the wants of the people. And we see that. The guidelines said low fat. People decided low fat. The industry responded with low fat and added sugar.
Yeah.
So the problem that I have with sort of a universal nutritional thing is if people are not going to cut back on carb, or if they're going to not understand what it is, so better education is key. If they're not going to understand that carbs are in bread, that carbs are in sweet potatoes, if they're not going to get that, if they're not going to understand that, then there's a danger in going too high in the fats. And I just think some education on the quality of fats. We just need better education. We need fewer registered dietitians and more nutritionists who understand the bigger picture and are not run by the industry. And I think that's where we're at with having the CNS instead of an RD. There's a lot of really good RDs out there. I don't want to downplay that, but we were allowed to think differently, whereas registered dietitians are, even if they believe that this is helpful, they're just not allowed to think differently, or they're going to be ostracized by their profession. And I see this. I mean, you've seen it. We just have to look in our own friends and colleagues and see the impact on people as individuals for straying from their what the herd believes.
Yeah, exactly. Think for yourself and customize. Tinker and test.
Tinker and test, I like that, yeah.
So I borrowed that from Jimmy Moore. He talks about that a lot. All right, so online resources, if people want to connect with you, I know you're active on social media and so forth. What's the best place if they're driving right now and they're writing down, where should they follow you?
Dietarytherapies.com is my website.
Okay. Awesome. Miriam, thank you so much for coming on the show and your great work.